Grüß, willkommen in einem anderen Fragens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 31 of my game system design series of videos. This is an attempt to analyse morale and quality rules and determine some basic guidelines in their creation for use in micro armor figure gaming rules. This is an updated version of my original video, which I initially posted in 2019. In this case, it's my fifth updated video, which includes corrected and updated content and improved images. The primary changes are updated images and greater clarity on the concepts I'm discussing. While this video primarily focuses on World War II, Cold War and modern, these lessons covered in the video could be applied to other periods as well, and in this updated version I will include Napoleonic and ancient rules, as I feel these periods will assist in understanding why rules have morale and quality rules. This video would be of interest to those creating their own rules or modifications to existing rules, as well as those interested in the evolution of different rules concepts since 1970. Most sets of rules have the concept of morale and morale tests, but quality is a more recent concept. Back in the 1970s to 1990s, only morale was normally considered, but since the 2000s, the concept of quality has grown in importance in rules. While these concepts are certainly linked, that is, quality and morale, they are subtly different. The concept of morale and quality allows us to differentiate different troop types and allows players another objective, apart from totally eliminating the enemy, which is causing the enemy to run away. Some game systems merge morale into the combat system, so there are no morale tests. In this system, when the element is removed, this would represent a rout as well as being eliminated. If it's routing, it could possibly come back. Simplicity is good, and if possible, this is a worthwhile objective. But it is not simple to achieve without causing other issues that you need to consider. Troop quality is also present in some rules, although it's not as historically common, that is in rules design, as morale, being generally absent before 2000. Quality normally affects the ability of elements to do something or its direct combat ability. A high quality element can conduct fire combat better, conduct close assault better, and do things which low quality elements, in terms of quality, cannot do. Before the concept of quality became common, it was often represented by morale in an ad hoc manner. For elite troops, apart from being harder to rout, they could also fight better than, let's say, trained troops. Specific quality rules have risen in prominence into the 2000s. In the ancient worlds, quality has almost replaced the concept morale and is present in many Napoleonic rules as well. There is a reason for this occurring in ancients and Napoleonic rules, which we'll cover later, but is less common for World War II and Cold War rules. I suspect this is because these rules try and merge morale and quality together, that is, World War II and Cold War rules. As I've kept on saying, morale and quality, while often being bundled together, actually represent two different aspects of gaming, or the troops or units: the willingness to fight and the skill at fighting. The classic example of this difference are fanatic troops, which may be willing to fight but may have minimal skill in doing so. So their morale would probably be high, but their quality would probably be low. In simple terms, morale deals with how likely are troops to run away. Morale tests are required. How likely will troops attack? Again, using morale tests. On the other hand, quality deals with when they are doing something, that is troops, that is complex, how likely is it that they will succeed? For simplicity, or perhaps convention, most World War II and Cold War rules would try and merge these two concepts, with the only difference being fanatic troops or perhaps unwilling troops, where there would be special rules. In most cases, the troops with poor morale will also have poor skill, so this is a reasonable assumption. For ancients and Napoleonics, while some merging did exist in the past, the main reason for morale tests have reduced to the point where the main focus is quality rather than morale. Morale, instead, is built into the combat system. Instead of spinning a morale test to determine if a unit can charge into combat, this is controlled by, let's say, command control rules, PIPs for example, for DBMM, and the test as a result is no longer conducted. The change in game turn scale and the desire for greater playability has been the main reason for the decline in morale tests in ancients and to a lesser extent in Napoleonics. While there are many different morale tests, the most common involves a morale test involving throwing a dice and consulting a table with a list of modifiers. The number of morale categories was not as significant, although there was an attempt to keep this as low as possible. This tended to be the case for World War II and Cold War rules, but even common in the Napoleonics area, with WRG Napoleonics only possessing a small list of different morale types. Later, some rules went crazy, with Empire III possessing about 12 different morale classes. In the end, designers realised less is more and reduced the different numbers. When the concept of quality became popular, there was also a desire to increase the number of different qualities in many rules, but this rarely went beyond 5 or 6. The reason is very simple. Each type you create, each time you create a new morale or quality, you make army lists more complex and keeping tracks of elements with different morale or quality more difficult. If you look at DBMM, their basic morale classes of superior, ordinary and inferior more often represent specific troop types rather than morale or quality, although there is a morale quality aspect in this grouping. So from my observation, rules which require quality or use quality tend to keep the number down to less than 5 or perhaps 5 at the most. If using 5 morale or quality classes, you could use a 6-sided dice for a simple test. For example, morale 5 means it fails on a 6. This chart shows 6 morale classes, but by adding a always fail on 6 rules, you can cater for fanatic morale in this particular case and use a D6 dice for testing purposes if required. Using this system, a fanatic element which would rout would, in this case, pass on a 6, thus fanatic can never rout. But for any other type of test, the fanatic would fail. Fanatic would typically be less skilled than elite, and unwilling would typically be more skilled than raw. So players can play around with different maximums and minimums for each type of test. This allows you to show a difference between morale and quality without being forced to create separate values and rules. In addition to reducing the classes of morale or quality, the tests would potentially become more simple. Let's now drill into more detail around morale and determine why you would wish to utilise it in a set of rules. Morale has 2 basic purposes: determine when an element will run away and determine how likely an element would do something risky. The first purpose would require a test each time the element suffers some casualty or comes under fire for the first time or something of that nature. You would even include the first time it sees an enemy, for example, if it's raw, or sees or hears something really scary like rocket artillery. Ideally, this should occur at the moment the event occurs, for the simple reason it means you do not have to keep track of anything. This begs the question, if morale is tested each time the element suffers a casualty, why not build it into the fire combat system? Some rules build routing into the fire combat or casualty system, which avoids morale tests at all. In those cases, the element is removed and can come back in a rally phase, for example. There are many other different systems you could use in this case. This merging of morale into the combat system is a general trend, as it increases playability as well as achieves the purpose of having morale rules in the first place. Strangely enough, this merging idea was first proposed back in the early 1970s in the Wargamers Digest rules, but apart from this example was largely absent until well into the 2000s. The final morale activity we need to consider is how likely will the element rally or recover from a failed morale test. This should be done in a housekeeping phase ideally. In rules where it's possible to rally, the trend has been in making this test as simple as possible, which normally requires keeping the modifiers down to a very small list. If you do it in a separate phase, where both players can do it at the same time, it becomes comparatively manageable if you want to do this. When morale effects uses a combined morale fire casualty system, the game turn the element comes back, if at all, is determined in the housekeeping phase if you go down this path. As it's in a separate phase, it can have additional complexity built into it relating to the battle situation, such as a modifier for each element it can see if you so desire. The designer can go a bit wild because, again, as I've indicated, it's in a separate phase, both players can do it simultaneously, so you can afford to spend a bit of an extra time without unduly affecting game flow. Let's look at the historical context of why the morale testing concept has declined. In the beginning of the hobby, each side had forces which could do anything each game turn. there was no restrictions on what a unit could do. Some game systems could deal with this, but early rules used very small game turn scales, perhaps 60 to 90 seconds in some cases. Doing everything which was physically possible for every increment of 60 to 90 seconds was simply not realistic and generated some really unusual effects. While this was more a factor in ancient Napoleonic rules, morale was often used to determine if units could charge into contact or basically restrict what a unit could do. In some cases, morale-based tests would force units to do things the owning player did not wish it to do. In simple terms, morale was used to reduce the ability of each player to utilise every unit to its maximum every game turn, thus permitting very small duration game turns. This issue was really caused by the game turn scale. Early rules wanted each player to deal with what was occurring in a very small time frame, be it World War II, Napoleonics or Ancients. This kind or type of scale belongs in a skirmish set of rules, not a set of rules which allows you to command a World War II battalion or Napoleonic division or corps. As time progressed, the scales were changed to something more reasonable, sometimes moving to a 30 to 60 minute per game turn scale. This allowed you to build in the average movement, melee and fire combat which a unit would typically do within a larger game turn scale. In some cases, allowing some units in some circumstance to do more if the unit quality was unusually high or if some unusual event occurred. This change in scale reduced the requirement for units to conduct some form of morale test to charge or to do stuff you didn't want it to do. Early Ancients and Napoleonic rules had a truly massive number of different morale tests. Most of that is gone because it could be done simpler and in a more playable manner simply by changing the game scale. The WRG Napoleonic rules used 8 different reaction tests, each of which had its own list of modifiers. Once this need was gone, designers looked to remove as many of these tests as possible, such as replacing routing by building it into the combat system. Let's now focus on quality. Quality differs from morale in being focused on training, skill and experience. There is a crossover with morale, but the emphasis is different. There are many possible effects or game effects of quality. The first is the ability of the element to move and conduct fire combat. High quality troops may have the option of increasing their movement by 50% or of conducting an extra fire combat. This could be automatic or could require some kind of simple quality test. For simplicity, the quality test could be by headquarters, affecting all subordinate elements. At the other end, poor quality troops may be restricted, move 50% less or conduct fire combat less. Once again, a test at headquarters level is the simplest mechanism of doing that. Even though it affects all of the subordinate elements at the same time, it's a simple process. In addition, quality tests, unlike morale tests, typically don't have many modifiers, if any at all, making them a very simple test. Now let's look at where quality should be determined. It could be by element or by multi-element unit or at a headquarters level. As I've indicated earlier, the simplest system is by headquarters. Each side will typically have about 4 headquarters, and this keeps the number of quality die rolls down. It should be noted morale is being tested at the element level. It should always be tested at the element level, with a quality level test needing to be determined at a headquarters level in this particular case. Of course, the issue with doing this at the headquarters level is what occurs when we mix different quality type troops. The quick answer is don't mix different quality troops. But in practice, if the bulk of the troops are elite, that may rub off, so work on the majority rule. But the best way to reduce this minor issue is to keep all troops at the same quality. Quality could also be used to control fire and air support. High quality troops can cool down fire and air support more reliably than low quality troops. It would help if the artillery and aircraft had the same quality as well, although in this case just count the lowest quality. This actually allows you to avoid complex fire and air support rules. You could also include modifiers for the level of command you have to go through to request it, which represents only a minor increase in complexity with a corresponding impact on realism. Also, restricting indirect fire from artillery is a good thing because historically it did actually occur in World War II. If you allowed artillery to go crazy every single game turn, it would dominate the battlefield every single game. So going down this path is probably highly recommended. A quality test can also be used to determine how quickly the engineering tasks are conducted, assuming it's a complex task. There are a host of game functions which could be controlled by quality tests. Ability to adopt certain modes or launching a closer combat are example. The key rule here is this solves a problem. If the answer is no, then don't do it. But if it solves a real problem or adds something significant, then this is a low complexity method of doing it. As I keep on saying in my other presentation, the important thing is to always keep it simple. The advantage of quality is it can be used to replace rules such as orders, command points, calling down fire support, and calling down air support. In this case, adding these extra quality rules reduces the overall complexity because you are removing a greater number of rules elsewhere. Now let's look at the big picture summary. In the beginning, morale was used to control what a unit could do. You need a reaction test to initiate a charge, to rally from pursuit, what happens when you meet an enemy for the first time, and to charge home. The other morale tests, such as testing to rally from rout, testing response to a charge, testing response to shooting, and testing after losing a melee, are also tests which attempt to take control of these units' actions from the player, which also restricts the scope of their activities. All this was required primarily because of the game turn scale. The amount of morale testing which was required by rules does vary by the rules itself. In WRG 1950 and 1985 rules, the tests are restricted to a unit which has an element suppressed for the first time, unit which has had an element knocked out, and if currently under reaction restriction. In all cases, it's about restricting what a unit can do, although in this case, in reaction to what the enemy does. So the number of morale tests were reduced in some rules. Other rules, they just went crazy. Rules have moved away, nonetheless, rules have moved away from this type of restrictions. Thus, the need to conduct reaction or morale tests to determine if you can do something is certainly not as common as it used to be. In summary, the main reason for this was due to a change in scale and the desire to increase playability or speed of game. At the same time, while morale was becoming less common, the concept of quality was becoming more common. So in GHQ's microsquad set of rules, the HQ has a +1 or a -1 quality modifier which affects the amount of activities these units can conduct in a game turn, or subordinate units can conduct in a game turn. This can span to fire effectiveness, movement rates, melee values, ability to call down fire support, ability to call down air support, and so on. Once again, the rise of quality main driver was due to the scale changes. The game turn spans a greater number of time, and instead of allowing every unit to move the maximum amount possible in a given time frame, inefficiency is assumed and built into the game turn, and a quality role is required to determine how additionally ineffective the utilisation of the time was, or how additionally effective the utilisation of that time was. In some cases, quality is also used to reduce or eliminate the need of orders. A high-quality unit can, on its own initiative, do whatever it feels like is best. On the other hand, a low-quality unit will often spend a lot of time wondering what to do. The driver for quality rules is the desire to increase playability and speed of play, while retaining the key historical factors which made many engagements interesting. Some very simple set of rules simply assume all quality is the same and ignore both morale and quality factors. These tend to be very simple game systems, but have their place as a method for new players to get into the hobby. Let's look at a number of situations which may benefit from morale or quality rules. The way this needs to be thought is the problem statement needs to be specified first, and then you can determine if morale or quality rules will assist in solving that problem statement. The most obvious problem statement is how do you differentiate between high-quality troops and low-quality troops in combat, either fire combat or melee. WRG DBMM has gone down the path of identifying troop types such as Spartan hoplites and given it a troop type which represents its quality. This happens to be regular spearman superior. The Spartans also possess Spartan perikoiae, which are regular spearmen ordinary. While superior and ordinary could be a type of quality, the combination is a very specific troop type. This is a type of quality with its effect being spread along the rules in a host of locations, providing benefits in terms of modifiers or outcomes to combat. We can see the same in many Napoleonic rules. Thus, old guard is often classed as guard, while young guard is classed typically as veteran or even standard. In this case, it's also a type of quality. Other rules provide quality grades, such as LWRS, which provides quality values from 1 to 6. In summary, some sort of quality rule is ideal to solve this problem of different quality or troop type qualities. In some cases, a quality test may be required as well for many actions that these units may wish to perform. Let's now look at how can we deal with routing and rallying. Many more recent rules build this in the combat system, so there is no routing and there's no rally required. Other rules do use a test for eliminated elements which may allow them to return based on a quality level. If the rules do support the concept of routing and rally from morale, then a morale system may be ideal. In some cases, you may wish to restrict the ability of a player to use an element on the playing area. Traditionally, restricting a player's options was achieved through the use of morale and orders, testing mainly and writing orders. While this restricting has become less common in most rules, it still has its place in skirmish rules. Some type of morale system with morale tests could be used in restricting what a single soldier could do, depending on external situations. This could include seeing an enemy for the first time, hearing firearms, being shot at, etc. The use of morale or quality rules really depends on what a player wishes to achieve, or actually the rules design what it wishes to achieve. So I have no advice on optimal rules or whether you should use morale or quality if you're designing a set of rules. The key principle to use is keep it simple. If you need to add a rule, what problem is it solving? If there's no problem, then don't add it, or add it as an optional rule. If morale or quality rules can replace more complex order or command rules, or can mitigate a game turn scale issue caused by a designer who wishes a telescoping scale, depending on the activity required, then that's a good reason to include these rules. And so we now come to an end of my episode 31 of my video on micro armor game system design, in this case covering morale and quality. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.